school and started homeschooling for lots of reasons. But there's been something that's been on her mind that she's really concerned about. And I hear it again and again. I see it on Facebook again and again. And so I want to talk about this today so that you can have your mind rest easy. Because I know some of you are really concerned. You're still worried that you're failing. You've probably cried. You probably thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to put him back in school. And I want you to know, like, give yourself some grace and some peace. Allow yourself peace because you are doing better than you think you are, okay? And so please give yourself grace. I promise they're going to be just fine. And they may want to go back to school for a little bit as they're adjusting. Remember, you have to deschool. They have to deschool. It's part of the process. We are used to doing what we're told, when we're told, how we're told, all of those things. And now you're coming out into a totally different form of education. And frankly, it's better. You want your kids to be able to think freely and to do well. But this was my sister's concern, is what if my girls aren't able to write well? Like, what if they can't write well? I want them to be able to write really well. I want them to be good writers and be able to communicate their thoughts and their ideas in written form. And I hear that concern with parents over and over again. And so I want to share a few things with you to give you some tools to help you with that and to let your mind rest at ease a little bit. So let's go back in time to when I was in the 8th grade. When I was in the 8th grade, there was a quiz bowl, and it was homeroom against homeroom. And I signed up for my homeroom mostly because we had 34 kids in the class and 3 of us were girls and the rest were boys. And all of the boys were like not into the quiz bowl, right? So I signed up. My English teacher was there, which was interesting because she didn't even really like me. But she was at the quiz bowl. And I was really excited because I considered myself a pretty smart kid. I didn't love doing work, homework and things like that. I like studying what I like to study. I would have been a great unschooler, but that wasn't an option for me. Didn't even know about it back then, and neither did my mother. And so in the quiz bowl, you were given a question, you had 30 seconds to think about it, and then you had to answer. And so this was my question. I've never forgotten it. Not ever. And so this was the question, okay? They got to me and they said, what are the 4 components of a sentence? And immediately I went to, okay, sentence structure. Okay, if I'm looking at sentence, which is major clauses. Okay, is it we have all of these different thoughts. And my mind was just racing like trying to think about the diagrams of a sentence that my teachers all through the years had done with me. And finally they're like, okay, time's up. What is your answer? And I'm like, I don't know. And I felt so dumb. Like I was out right away. First question, I was out. And the funny thing is the whole time I kept looking at my English teacher, and she had this quizzical look on her face like, and I could tell she was thinking the same thing as me. Like, what the heck? I don't know. So finally the lady said, okay, time's up. And the answer, and I'm sorry, you don't have an answer. The answer is every sentence starts with a capital, it ends with a punctuation mark, and it has a verb and a noun. That was it. And I felt so dumb. I felt so stupid because I knew that. Like I knew how to write a sentence, but I didn't even think about like the simplicity of the sentence. Like I went straight into how to diagram a sentence. The funny thing is my English teacher, Ms. Thornock, at the time said, you know, it's funny because I got it wrong in my head. She's like, I didn't even think about a capital and a period and noun and verb. She goes, I'm an English teacher. I've been teaching English for years. And I immediately went into how to diagram a sentence and all of the things with complex sentences. I didn't even think about the simplicity of the sentence, which I thought was really fascinating. So on Facebook this week, somebody posted, my son is really frustrated with sentence diagramming and he refuses to do it anymore. And what do I do? And da-da-da. And so that got me thinking. And then my sister called, and then other people were posting stuff like, oh, I'm so frustrated with language arts and all this stuff. So when we started homeschooling, I bought English curriculums, right? And immediately started learning to diagram a sentence with my third grader in the English curriculum that we had bought for him. And he was confused. And the sad thing is, like, I have a college degree and I was confused, but I'm like, we're going to figure this out. It's been a long time since I've done this, but we'll figure it out, right? And by the end of the year, we kind of threw it out the window, right? I stopped altogether using the curriculum because I felt like it was so much unnecessary, confusing information. And those of you who are like English teachers or, you were English majors, I'm sorry. How many of you think about diagramming sentences all the time, right? You don't. And we lose the simplicity of writing in many of these curriculums because they worry about so many things. The sad part is, like, for as much as like people have to take generally in public school 4 years of English, and then they get into college and they have to do, literature, and they have to do English composition 1 and 2. The reality is there are so many people coming out of college who can't write a coherent sentence. And I think that's really, really sad. And so I think, okay, so how do we teach our children to do it? And I say that in all seriousness. I have a friend who said she runs a business and some of her employees cannot write coherent sentences, and they're not running an industrial company, right? They're running a company that has clerical work, and they're college graduates who can't write coherent sentences. I, for 20 years, have been looking at resumes up until just a few months ago when I said, like, I'm not hiring for small businesses anymore. This is not my passion. I just want to focus on my kids, right? And I would look at several hundred resumes a day. And out of those, it was a breath of fresh air for me to read a cover letter where they actually use capitalization and periods, punctuation marks, separated into paragraphs where they could write a complete thought. And I'm not kidding. And a lot of these people in the positions that I was hiring for were not like these industrial positions that were just manual labor, which, by the way, you still need to write a sentence for. They were upper level positions that would require somebody to be able to communicate thoughts. And most of the people who applied for those positions were college graduates, and yet it was a rare thing for me to find people who could write coherent sentences, where it wasn't all just one long run-on sentence with a bunch of emojis. So for me, for a long time, I'm like, what the heck are they teaching in universities? Now we get the advent of AI, and we have kids who just put everything into AI, and the AI writes the papers. And college professors are like, no. We can tell if AI writes the paper. No, you can't. No, you cannot. I've used it enough now. It's been out a few months, and I've been playing with it. You can't tell. Right? So this beautiful form of like being able to communicate written has kind of been lost. But yet again, in curriculums in school, we focus on like all this fluff. How do you diagram a sentence? And what are all these things? And what are the clauses? Right? And do we necessarily need that information? So that's what I've been thinking about. And how do we really teach kids to be proficient writers and be able to communicate their thoughts and feelings onto the written page? And so I want to share a story. This is a true story. I'm going to read it directly. This is from edmundbusiness.com, written by Mike Crandall, and he's recounting a story. And so I'm just going to read it verbatim here. I printed it out for you. In July 1961, Vince Lombardi, he was that great football coach, kicked off the first day of training camp for the 38 players on his Green Bay Packers football team. The prior season had ended in a heartbreaking loss to the Philadelphia Eagles after blowing a lead in the fourth quarter of the NFL championship game. When the players came in to start training camp, they expected to immediately begin where they left off and work on ways to advance their game and learn fancy new ways to win the championship in the new season. When they sat down and began, Vince Lombardi held up a football and said, "Gentlemen, this is a football." He then had everyone open up their playbooks and start on page 1, where they began to learn the fundamentals: blocking, tackling, throwing, catching, etc. That was clearly not what they expected as players who were at the top of their game. Again, this is the NFL, friends. These are not rookies, and these are not Pee-wee leagues, right? This is the NFL. This hyper focus on fundamentals allowed them to win the NFL championship that season 37-0 against the New York Giants. Vince Lombardi went on to win 5 NFL championships in 7 years. He never coached a team without a losing season after that, and never lost a playoff game again. If focusing on fundamentals can elevate a great team to such great heights, imagine what it can do for your business and life. And I would say your homeschooling. We are often putting time, energy, and money into looking for the next magic bullet, quick fix, or business trick. Instead, we should focus on the fundamentals. One of the greatest mistakes business owners and leaders make is not focusing on the fundamentals. And again, that's from EdmondBusiness.com by Mike Crandall, who retold the story about Vince Lombardi. So, how do you teach your kids to write? This was one of my concerns. When I pulled my daughter, she was in the middle of her 6th grade year when COVID hit. I pulled her after that in the summertime in 2020, as I've mentioned many times before. And we tried doing an English curriculum. She'd get very frustrated. But the interesting thing is, last year, as I've mentioned before, I signed her up for college courses. And she passed English Composition 1 and English Composition 2 with flying colors. I want to say she aced English Composition 1 and she got like a B+ in English Composition 2. And yet, really, she only had a 6th grade writing level. I mean, really. And what we had done is I tried doing the English curriculums for her and with her, and ended up kind of throwing them out the window. And then she went to the Thomas Jefferson education class where she had to write some papers about history, but they were 1-page opinion papers and they didn't judge their English. But what I did do was I started talking to her about the fundamentals. I'd say, "Katie, this is a sentence. Every sentence starts with a capital letter and ends with a punctuation mark of some kind. A sentence, several sentences together, makes up a paragraph. A paragraph is a complete thought. And when you have a new thought, you start a new paragraph. When you start a paragraph, you indent a little bit." And I just explained to her the fundamental things about writing. That's it. And then we went about, I had her do 3 things that Charlotte Mason talks about. Remember, we talked about the Charlotte Mason method. Charlotte Mason lived in the late 1800s in the 19th century. And she came up with this thing that she would do with her students to help them become prolific writers. And so we'll talk about those 3 things. But then the other thing that I had Katie do was read, and she read a lot. And she still reads a lot. And we would read aloud. There is power, as we talked about last week, in reading aloud to your children, because you're decoding. They're able to decode those words without having to look at the words, right? They can decode them within the sentence structure without having to figure out the words themselves, right? So we read aloud. She started reading by herself. And then we would just do the Charlotte Mason method, which is copywork, narration, dictation. And as they're older, you could do transcription as well. But for today's purposes, all we did was copywork, narration, dictation. And then I'd have her write journal entries. And then occasionally we do a poetry tea time. And I'll talk about the poetry tea time towards the end because it's super fun. So what are these 3 things that Charlotte Mason talked about? Now, copywork. is what it sounds like. You find a little selection from a work of literature. It could be a scripture verse. It could be a Bible verse. You could take 3 sentences or 2 sentences or 1 sentence, depending how old the child is, out of a book of some sort. You could take it out of Charlotte's Web. You could even do a recipe. It doesn't really matter. You're just having them see the sentence structure, and they literally copy word for word and punctuation mark for punctuation mark of what they see on that page. Okay. Why would we do this? Why would we literally have them copy somebody else's literature, somebody else's writing? And it's not even a lot. You could do, my 7-year-old will do like a sentence, a short sentence, but she'll do a sentence, right? My older kids would do a full paragraph sometimes. Like at the beginning, it was like 3 sentences, but they'll do it. But why? Why would we do that? Well, it involves them in writing and practicing skills, not only in penmanship, but it helps them with spelling, grammar, and vocabulary, because they're seeing those things and then they're doing at the same time. So remember how we talked about like finding out how your child learns? Well, most people learn through multiple modalities, right? So with copywork, they sit down and they literally copy a passage. I often have parents say, well, where do you find the passages? My friends, open a book. Open any book. It could be, you could copy out of a magazine article. It doesn't really matter. Find something that looks interesting. Find a chapter book, print out. You could even handwrite it. It doesn't really matter. You say, copy this and have them copy. So they're looking at the words, they're writing the words, they're looking at the punctuation, and they're copying the punctuation. And then you can point out, hey, notice here, you didn't capitalize. It's important that we capitalize things. Why do we capitalize things? Well, when something's a proper place or it begins at the beginning of the sentence, we put a capital, we capitalize the letter. Or you forgot your punctuation mark here. That's kind of important because that completes the thought. And so that's how we do copywork. You could do it every day. That's the best if you could do it every day. Some of you might be like, it's too much, right? So just do it 3 times a week or do it 2 times a week. Once a week is better than not at all. Okay, so have them copy. So that's called copywork. So if you can find better literature, it's even better. Charlotte's Web, like some of these beautiful classic novels, have them choose one of those. It was interesting, and I think I've actually shared this before, but one day my daughter came down and she'd been reading Anne of Green Gables, and she was she was sobbing, and she had her journal with her, and she had literally copied like 3 pages of Anne of Green Gables of this letter, and she cried and cried and cried. I'm like, why are you crying so much? And she's like, it's so beautiful. It was such beautiful writing, and the thought and what he was saying, that I had to write it down also in my journal. So she did. And so she was naturally starting to do copy work herself. So that's copy work. Okay. So what is dictation? So dictation can be, one more thing about copy work. You could do the same passage over and over and over again all week, or every day you could choose a different passage. It's really up to you. There's not like a right or a wrong way to do it. Just doing it at all. Like, again, we still have in our mindsets like this, we've been trained, those of us who went through public school, that we have to do things a certain way or else it's wrong. It's not. Like, you could do the same passage every day, or you could choose different passages each day. It's really up to you how you want to do it. Okay, so that's copy work. They literally copy a passage from a good book, a scripture, whatever, right? Directions to a recipe. It could be anything, seriously. Okay, so then the next thing is dictation. Dictation is where you read a portion of literature and then the students write what they hear. So sometimes you might let them look at the words first. You could do what they've been copying all week if you do the same thing every week. But this time they look at it and then you put it away, and they don't get to look at it word for word, right? Because usually when we copy, we have to write one word at a time. With dictation, you have them put it away. You say, okay, pull out a blank piece of paper. I'm going to read this several times, and I want you to write down what you hear and make sure that you have correct punctuation. Make sure that you put the capitals in the right place. And I'm going to show you if you make a mistake, I'll have you make your corrections, okay? So you begin with really simple sentences. You don't read it you don't read them word by word, but read the selection as a whole, and then just keep rereading it to them. It's easy to go, oh, they're not going to be able to remember. But if you do it like a sentence at a time or the selection at a time, they'll get it, right? This also helps them with memory. Narration does this as well. Okay, so if you watch them, then you can see, oh, they keep skipping capitalization. So I need to really talk to them about making sure things are capitalized, or really make sure they understand when something's capitalized. But you might do this once a week, right? You don't do all of these every day, all day. And again, each of these activities only takes 5-10 minutes tops, right? It doesn't take very long. So one day you might do copy work, and then the next day you might do dictation. They can look at the page, and then you take it away, and then you read it to them, and you read the whole selection. And then you have them write down what they hear. Okay, so now this is reiterating the things that they're learning as they've been doing copy work. Okay, so that's dictation again. First is copy work, which is they literally copy. They're looking at the paper and they're copying it word for word. Dictation, you're reading it to, you give them a chance to look at it briefly, you take it away, and then you dictate the paragraph or the sentence or whatever it is, and you read the whole selection, and you read it as many times as you need to, because they're going to be like, oh, wait, can you reread that again? And yes, absolutely. It's not like, okay, read it, write it all from memory. No. You can read it several times, right, until they're all finished. And then you go, okay, let's look at how you did. So that's dictation. And then narration is a totally different animal. And for your kids that struggle with memory and remembering things, especially kids I see a lot of kids that have been on IEPs or had accommodations. They've had 504 accommodations or whatever. This is really good for those kids that struggle with memory. It's fantastic. And this is narration. You can do this a couple ways. You can either read a selection or read part of a story to them, and then you have them tell you back what they read and say, hey, okay, tell me about what I read. Recite to me what I read. Or you can have them do quiet reading time and read quietly, and then their own book or whatever, and then you come back and you have them retell you, well, what did you read today? My 11-year-old's reading Hatchet right now. And so every time, every day after he's finished his quiet reading time, I'm like, okay, Jacob, tell me what you read. And so he's been going, and he actually gets in the story. He's like, well, first this happened, and then this happened, and then it was a he didn't know it was a porcupine, but it was a porcupine. And so he's been able to retell the story. Another thing you can have them retell, especially little kids, is if they see a show, if they're watching Bluey or whatever. By the way, if you haven't seen Bluey, it is, oh my gosh, the most adorable show ever. They've watched a show. Have them retell you the show, especially if they're littles and when they're really tiny, their little hands aren't quite developed, so they're learning to write, right? So you can have them, instead of having to, they're too little to do dictation necessarily, you can have them do narration where they just tell you. Again, narration doesn't involve writing at all. It involves them telling you what they read. Now, I take that back. There is narration where you can have them write a summary, but at the beginning, have them just orally tell you. Or if they really struggle with things like memory, or they've struggled in English, they've struggled in those things, have them orally tell you. Have them narrate back what they read, or what you read, or what they watched. this is super cool. If they're little, you could also have them draw a picture, tell what they read. You could have them draw a picture about what they read. So it helps them, and it's kind of similar to a little bit like for the little kids, like to a book report. But this is cool. Like as they're retelling the story, it enables them to sequentially put things in order. It helps them to remember things, and then they're able to own the information and then communicate it back. Because the purpose of writing, right, is to be able to communicate via written words our thoughts, our feelings, ideas, all of those things, right? And so we need to be able to communicate. Narration helps with that ability to communicate. So those are the three things. Now, transcription is when they have to listen to long passages and then they transcribe the passages. That's usually for much older kids, like you're looking in a high school. But for now, just copywork, dictation, narration. Those are the three things you can focus on. So you do that, right? So they learn to start retelling the story. They learn to see the structure of sentences, and you're able to pinpoint and point out different things. Other things that you can do is have them do journal entries where I've got a couple books here. One is called Rip the Page, and it's Adventures in Creative Writing and Open-End Writing Experiments. I've got One Question a Day Journal for Kids, 365 Days All About Me. And like this has like what makes you happy and why. And so children can then write, like express themselves in a journal. There's stuff for prompts for older kids. What's the nicest thing you've ever done for somebody else? And you could have them do journal entries as well. I've had my kids do that quite a bit as well, where we go over journal entries and they write what's on their mind. And then only about once a week will I correct their grammar or their spelling with their journal entries. You can give them spelling words if you want to. That's really up to you. Lots of parents love to give spelling words. I've never really done spelling words. I've corrected their spelling as I've needed to. And it's interesting, my 7-year-old will always ask me, how do I spell this? And she wants me to write it, and then she wants me to verbally say it because she learns both ways. And so if you want to do spelling words, you can. It's not necessary. But by just merely copying other people's work and seeing that, they will become better and better writers. And as they start to write journal pages and journal entries, they become better and better writers. And then you could have them do, like, I want you to write a report about this or express something about this. Now, I have another friend who pulled her son a couple years ago, and he is a senior in high school right now. And she's like, it's interesting. He's refused to write ever. He's refused to write papers. He refused to write this stuff. He was so burned out from school when we pulled him. She said, but the craziest thing happened. He loves history, and he just read one of the biographies by Ron Chernow about one of the presidents. And he came to me and was like, can I write a paper about this? There's so much I want to say about what I read about in the book. Can I write a paper? Like, he asked her if he could write a paper about this historical figure because he was so moved by this book that he read. So that is a possible, it's amazing what happens when we give our kids freedom and flexibility to learn and then teach them the simple principles. Another thing that you can do to help reiterate grammar is get a grammar book. I've got the Dragon Grammar Book, Grammar for Kids, Dragons, and the Whole Kingdom. And review a page, right? You want to give things in small doses, not huge doses. We learn in little snippets. We learn in sound bites. And children are no different. So give them, like, review. Usborne, which is now Paper Pie, has this cute little junior illustrated grammar and punctuation book. And you could go over a page, a couple pages a week. This is determiners. This is conjunctions. These are adverbs. It's interesting. I think about like nouns, pronouns, all of these things. Adjectives. Most people don't know what what they know what a noun is. They know what a verb is. Now everyone knows what a pronoun is, thanks to 4 years ago, a movement starting. I think that's the one good thing that's come out of that movement is suddenly people know what a pronoun is because they didn't before 4 years ago. But with these grammar and punctuation books, you can go over that stuff without beating it over your kids' heads, which is what I find a lot of the curriculums do is, okay, now you have to diagram the sentence, but nobody really pays attention to that. Nobody really cares. What you want them to do is know the basics. We're going to go back, as Vince Lombardi did. You got to go back to the fundamentals. This is a sentence. Several sentences make up a paragraph, which is a complete thought. There's a book that my little girl has, and it's called Home in the Woods. And there's one stanza. She loves this book. It's a true story. It's this picture book, and it's darling. And it essentially says, letters make up words. Words make up sentences. Sentences make up stories. And she loves that line. But it clicked with her even as little. She's like, oh, when you put lots of letters together, it makes a word. And I said, right, it does. And that came from just that book. And that simple fundamental clicked with her, which was really, really cool. So again, get back to the basics. Teach them the simple things. This is a sentence. This is a football, my friends. This is a sentence. A sentence starts with a capital letter and ends with a punctuation mark and has a verb and a noun. A verb is an action word. A noun is a person, place, or thing. Like, get back to the very, very basics, and they will be just fine. Now, for those of you who are like, but I also want them to do poetry. So I want to tell you a fun thing you can do for poetry, which will help them love poetry and be endeared to it and enjoy it and not see it as a task, but as a fun, just happy part of their life. And that is called Poetry Tea Time. I got this idea from Julie Bogart, who wrote The Brave Learner. She also is the author of the Brave Writer writing series. So if you're like, no, I have to use a writing curriculum, take one of her classes, have your kids go through her classes. She does a lot of narration, dictation, copywork, and then springboards from there. And she also has passages you can purchase to buy, with read alouds and things like that. So she has a whole curriculum that you can go with. But this is where I got the idea of Poetry Tea Time. And I loved it, and my kids ended up loving it. And this is what Poetry Tea Time is. Every now and again, we do it like maybe once a quarter. I set the table really beautiful. I get little finger treats. My kids don't like tea, so we get hot chocolate and we pull out teacups, and we get little finger snacks or finger sandwiches. You could even take Twinkies and cut them up and put them on a plate and make them look pretty, or like make little muffins. It doesn't really matter. But you take some treat, you put it on the table, and then you take stacks of poetry books. And I didn't bring any up with me today to show you, but I'll put some in the show notes. So you take those poetry books and you spread them out, sprinkle them out along the table, and then you eat. And each child gets to pick a poem from one of those books and share it. That's it. That's all you do. Sometimes the kids will be like, can I share more than one poem? Because what happens is the kids will start flipping through to find a poem. You could have Shel Silverstein's poetry books. You could have Robert Frost poetry books. You could have, children's garden verses, whatever you can get from the library. You don't have to go out and buy these things. Get them from the library, but you sprinkle them around the table, and the children choose a book or choose two books, and they choose a poem to share with everybody, and then they share the poetry. And you sit and eat and share the poetry. And that's all. That's it. It's that simple. But my kids have actually come to love poetry, even though we've only done it a few times. They still ask. Even my 16-year-old's like, can we do Poetry Tea Time again? Because it's super fun, and I really love the finger foods, right? They associate the Poetry Tea Time and the poetry with like comfort and feeling of fun and delight and food and all the things. And so I did that once. My parents were visiting. So we decided to do a poetry tea time. And my father, who is not like he's a math guy, he's a math computer guy. He's now in his 80s and he loved it, but he's not a poetry guy, right? So we sat around and he's like, so what do we do? And my kids are like, Papa, all you do is like find a poem you want to read. That's it. But the kids will spend like 5 or 10 minutes like finding the perfect poem. My father did the same thing and I about died. It was so tender and so like, and he ended up picking "Oh Captain, My Captain." And he's like, this is the one I want to read. And so he's like, may I stand to read it? And we're like, sure. So he did. Anyway, he loved it. My parents loved it and my kids loved it. And it was so fun. You can have them memorize poems as well. My kids have memorized some poems. My kid's favorite poem is by Emily Barrett Browning. It goes like this: earth's crammed with heaven and every common bush afire with God, but only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit round and pluck blackberries. So we memorized super short poem by Emily Barrett Browning. My kids love that poem. We went hiking. And sometimes I've got some of them who are like, I want to share Emily Barrett Browning's poem for poetry tea time. And then I'll share something else. But they know that. They know it by heart. So we were hiking earlier this week, Blessings of Homeschool. We went camping and nobody was there. It was awesome. So as we're on the hike, there's all of these fresh raspberries that are wild. And we know that they're edible. We know that they're fine. You know, they're not poisonous. We know they're raspberries. We have all the field guides and everything with us. And so the kids are sitting there plucking the raspberries and eating them off these wild trees as we're in the backwoods of Colorado and hiking in very, very natural terrain, right? Very far from civilization. We had to drive a long time to get there. And I bring up that poem and naturally this beautiful learning moment happens. I'm like, what do you think she meant when she said, but only he who sees takes off his shoes? And my son was like, that's a reference to Moses and the burning bush. I'm like, you think so? My daughter's like, oh, 100%. Because they say that every bush is a fire with God, right? She says that. Every bush is a fire with God, but only he who sees takes off his shoes. I'm like, why taking off his shoes? And they're like, maybe it's symbolic for reverence, like that we're in a holy place. I'm like, perhaps. You know, and I said, why the rest sit around pluck blackberries? I mean, here we are, we're eating raspberries. And my kids, like, who people are like, well, your kids are super smart. They are, but they're smart because they've been given the time and the energy to develop their own thoughts and feelings and, you know, all of the things since taking them out of school. They were smart before, but I've given them the latitude to think on their own and to process things. So they're like, well, perhaps everyone else just goes about living without seeing the divine around them. And I'm like, good, perhaps so. Do you think there's only one interpretation? And they're like, no, there could be many. You know, maybe she intended on one thing. But we have this beautiful discussion about this one poem that they know really, really well, which is really short. And it was beautiful. So my kids have come to love poetry. They enjoy it. I had one son for a long time. We would read a poem every day. Like that was part of read aloud. Is my 11-year-old really loves nature poems, and so we'd read short nature poems, and he loves them. He thinks they're beautiful. But because of poetry tea time, and they're not forced to like dissect the poems, you know, and write this big long report about the poems. They've come to love the poetry and have an affinity for poetry and appreciate it and see the beauty in it, even when they're little. And now my 7-year-old loves poetry because she associates it well. When we read poetry, we get to have treats, and it's very pretty and the table looks beautiful. So there we are, my friends. So let's review very quickly some things that you can do to help your children become great writers. Yes, you could do a curriculum if you want, but if you find that your kids are frustrated and you're frustrated, put it down. It's fine. It's fine. You don't have to complete it. And you could do copywork, narration, dictation. Again, copywork. They copy directly a passage by looking at it. Dictation, you read it aloud, they write it down, and then you correct where they made mistakes. And narration, you have them orally tell you the stories. Again, they could write it down. I've seen lots of parents write it down, but for those kids that really are still budding in their writing skills and it's still a struggle for them, just verbally repeat it. And it's good. And then do poetry tea time with them. And as always, read aloud to them, read to them, because it will help their writing. So with that, my friends, I hope that you have a great day. Know that you are doing better than you think you are. You are fantastic. You are great parents. You are capable of teaching your children despite what society may tell you. My friends, people did it for thousands of years, and we have had pretty amazing people who have come from homeschooling. I promise. You got this, Mama. You're doing awesome. Have a great week. Thank you so much for listening. And if you like this podcast, please be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter at schooltohomeschool.com. That's schooltohomeschool.com. Join our private Facebook group, School to Homeschool, and follow me on Instagram, Janae.Daniels.